Teacher, I'd like to sit next to a girl. Just as the homeroom teacher was assigning Brandon's seat beside me, I raised my hand. My boldness stirred whispers among my classmates. The teacher rapped on the lectern to hush the class before asking me, "Why?" Because in our first year of marriage, Brandon let me die in a fire to be with another woman. Yes, I'd been reborn. Reborn on the day I first met Brandon 10 years ago. On the day Brandon became my desk mate, I, like every other girl in the class, felt my heart flutter. It marked the beginning of my long, arduous journey to win his heart, where I'd eagerly have plucked stars from the sky for him, only to end up dying such a tragic death. This time, I was determined to keep my distance, because I want to focus on my studies. With him being so good-looking, I'd get distracted. I replied with utmost seriousness. The teacher, clearly unprepared for my bluntness, froze for a moment. In the end, he assigned me a new desk mate. That's a smart tactic, playing hard to get. My new desk mate, Matthew, tossed his bag onto the desk beside mine and raised a brow at me. I racked my brain, trying to recall anything about him. Vaguely, I remembered he was an athlete who rarely attended classes. Playing hard to get. What are you talking about? Matthew sat down next to me, tilting his head toward Brandon, who was now surrounded by a group of girls. You like that guy? I was stunned. I followed his gaze. Brandon sat upright, dressed in a crisp white shirt. He looked just like the version of him I'd fallen for back then, but I don't like him. I quickly looked away, focusing on arranging my books. Matthew suddenly leaned in, studying me intently. Just as I furrowed my brows, he said, "You're lying. When you like someone, your eyes give you away." Matthew was right. I still had feelings for Brandon. The moment I saw him on the podium, I knew it, but it was just a lingering habit, a remnant of 10 years of infatuation that I loved myself more as expected. Matthew was an athlete, only attending 2 classes a day on average. Most of the time, the seat next to me remained empty. That made my promise on the first day easy to keep. I threw myself into my studies, and slowly my feelings and focus on Brandon began to fade. By the end of the semester, I had climbed to 2nd place in the rankings, right behind Brandon. For a time, classmates said I was the one who best matched him. What are you worried about? She doesn't even like Brandon. Everyone says they're like oil and water. I overheard this in the restroom during a break. There was a faint sound of sniffles from the stall next door. The other girl continued, "Don't worry. You're beautiful. Brandon will definitely notice you one day." So gentle and reassuring. Besides, I heard Rachel actually likes Matthew. The crying abruptly stopped, and a soft voice asked, "Really, really? Hard to believe, right? Even someone like Matthew has an admirer." I'd had enough. I pulled up my pants and stood up. I really don't like Brandon. I kicked open the neighboring stall door, startling the 2 girls inside. And I don't like Matthew either. They were too frightened to speak. I turned to leave, but then paused. And another thing, Matthew isn't just someone like that. He's a million times better than Brandon. With that, I walked out without looking back. Returning to the classroom, I saw that Matthew, who hadn't been there last period, was now seated, twirling his pen. He raised a brow at me. "Who ticked you off?" I shook my head. At least with someone like him, I wouldn't die alone in a fire. While he looked the other way. Brandon and I, both top students with decent looks, were chosen to represent our school in a city speech competition. Throughout the trip, I avoided being alone with him whenever possible. Then, backstage before the competition, he stood behind me and asked in a low voice, "I don't understand. Why do you hate me so much?" I didn't expect him to speak to me, Rachel. When I didn't respond, he called my name. It was the first time I'd heard him say my name since I'd come back to this life. It sounded unexpectedly good. I closed my eyes briefly, took a deep breath, then turned to face him. "I hate people who are good-looking and get good grades." He paused, then laughed out loud. "That's not a valid reason," he said, still smiling. "You're the same, and nobody hates themselves." Did I end my previous life? He'd never looked at me like this, not even on our wedding day, and he was wrong. Some people do hate themselves. And now Rachel from Second High will deliver her speech. Before I could say anything more, the announcer called my name. Straightening my back, I took the microphone and walked up to the podium. Fortunately, I liked the person I was now. In the past, I'd chased after Brandon. never daring to step onto a stage this big, with a second chance at life. I'd realized there were so many things worth pursuing besides Brandon. Well, isn't it, my dear deskmate? As soon as I stepped out of the event hall, I ran into Matthew. He glanced at Brandon behind me, then looked back at me with a meaningful grin. What are you doing here? Afraid he'd start something, I quickly grabbed him and pulled him away. He let me lead him while looking back at Brandon with a smirk, asking, feeling guilty, are we? I shot him a glare. What nonsense. You showed up just in time. I didn't want to go back with Brandon. Matthew was on the swim team for the first time. I sat in the massive sports hall to watch his competition. He stood on the diving platform in swim trunks, looking across the pool straight at me. Even from afar, I could see that signature mischievous expression. At the sound of the starting gun, he dove into the water. It was then I realized he might be even better looking than Brandon. Most importantly, he had chest and abs, something Brandon definitely lacked. At-17, and already that toned, I let my mind wander, only snapping back to reality as Matthew reached the finish line first. He gave me a carefree wave. Definitely a million times better than Brandon. After my speech, I ditched Brandon to watch Matthew's competition. And the story of us returning to school together spread quickly. The girls who fawned over Brandon started to drop their hostility toward me. But I forgot that Matthew is no easy character. Either dear Rachel, right? My path home after school was blocked by a group of girls. Their rough, casual outfits made it clear they weren't the academic type. Feigning innocence, I lied, I'm not. The girl in front turned to her friend. Wrong person. As they debated, Brandon called from not too far away, Rachel. He's got issues, he really does. As if ruining me in our last life wasn't enough. Now he's back for more. The girl leading the group sneered. So you dared lie to me. She stepped closer and I took a few steps back. Noticing the odd situation, Brandon started walking toward us. What do you think you're doing? He chided. Dude, you're only making it worse. The lead girl shot him a glance, raising an eyebrow. And now she's got a knight in shining armor? Knight, my foot. Soon enough, we found ourselves backed into a corner. What do you want? Just as I braced for a beating, a laid-back voice sounded from above. I looked up to see Matthew jumping down from the wall. Matthew. The lead girl looked a bit embarrassed. He shot her a look. You know I don't hit girls. That's why a lot of girls at school didn't like Matthew. He had a reputation as a brawler. Not exactly a badge of honor at a top high school, but try messing with my deskmate again. He slung his bag over his shoulder, strolling over to me, and I won't be making any promises. Without another word, the group scattered. See? That's what a real knight looks like. At least I saved you. Aren't you going to thank me? Matthew strolled lazily behind me, slinging his bag over one shoulder, his tone a bit rough. But I knew his irritation wasn't directed at me. When I turned around, I saw both him and Brandon had stopped walking, eyeing each other with thinly veiled hostility. Brandon's slight frown revealed his displeasure. I knew him well, never liked guys like Matthew, the roguish type, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Thank you, Matthew, for today. I took up Matthew's words, directing them at Brandon. I need to head home early, so I'll be going now. The tension between the two broke as they both turned to look at me. I'll walk you home. They spoke almost in unison. Rachel, here's your certificate from the speech competition. Brandon's frown deepened as he shot a glance at Matthew, then held out the award to me. Just in case someone tries to bother you again, let me walk you back. Taking the certificate, I barely had time to say no. Thanks before Matthew let out a snort. He walked over in a few steps, throwing his arm over my shoulder. Brandon should worry about protecting himself first. He gave me his trademark mischievous smile. Come on, I'll be your bodyguard. His antics made me laugh. Easing the irritation I'd felt, I jabbed him in the stomach with my elbow, shrugging him off, then turned to walk home, waving at him over my shoulder. And oh, need no delicate damsel. I've got plenty of strength and tricks up my sleeve. Behind me, Matthew's booming laughter echoed down the street. Maybe his laughter was infectious because I found myself smiling too. The annoyance and disgust that Brandon's presence had stirred up melted away. There's nothing wrong with a little mischief. Maybe it was Brandon who led me astray in the first place that I woke up to find my house engulfed in flames. Panic gripped me as I scrambled out of bed. only to discover the door was blocked by fire. With no choice, I grabbed a wet towel and rushed out onto the balcony. Then, something unexpected happened. I'd barely hung up with the fire department when I received a message. It was a photo of Brandon with a woman, disheveled and intimately close, staring at the image. It felt like the blood in my veins froze solid. My fear seemed to vanish, as if doused by a bucket of ice water. Brandon. There's a fire at home. I sent him a message. Even though he wasn't supposed to be at work today, he'd once told me he didn't like me calling him when he was working, so I never called him again. Even now, out of habit, I'd send a message instead. It took a moment for his reply to come. Put out the fire yourself. I'm in a meeting to meeting? I looked at the photo on my phone and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. The flames roared around me, and I could faintly hear the sound of fire truck sirens. Suddenly, the door flew open from outside. A beam of bright light flooded in. Rachel, if you don't get up now, you're going to be late. I opened my eyes to see my mom standing by my bed, looking at me with that familiar, exasperated expression. The emotions from my dreams still lingered, and I sat up, hugging her tightly. Mom, I had a nightmare. A terrible, terrible nightmare. She gently patted my back. Sleeping in will do that to you. Serves you right for being lazy. Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. Oh dear, you're getting harder to tease. I couldn't help but laugh. Thank goodness it was only a dream. My mother's playful scolding lifted my spirits, and I got up, went through my morning routine, and headed off to school feeling much better. But the moment I stepped outside, I ran into Matthew. Matthew? He blew a bubble with his gum, popping it before giving me a wave. What a coincidence. You live in this neighborhood? I nodded, continuing to walk ahead. You live here too? He shook his head, following me at a leisurely pace. Nah, just passing through on my way. Brandon has issues. I'm not joking. Rachel, can you solve this problem? One day between classes, Brandon suddenly approached my desk. I nearly jumped. The memory of last night's dream was still fresh, and I didn't want to see him, not even for a second. Without stopping my work, I replied coolly, no, I can't. You didn't even look at it. How do you know? He'd never acted like this before. I paused, glancing briefly at the problem he held out. It was the same one I'd just finished. I don't know. I calmly turned the page in my workbook, hiding the solution. As soon as Brandon walked away, I looked over to see Matthew lying on his desk, eyes open and watching me. The sunlight streamed through the window, falling across his playful gaze. Not only was he completely different from Brandon in personality, but he also had a whole different kind of charm. Full of life. What's so funny? I asked him. He blinked. I just think you're really good at playing hard to get. Not even a year. And he's already running over to you. I picked up my workbook and swatted him on the head. If you keep talking nonsense, I'll rip that mouth of yours off. I waved my fist threateningly, but that only made him laugh even louder. His laughter was so loud it drew everyone's attention in class. In a panic, I leaned over and clamped a hand over his mouth. When he finally stopped laughing, I realized what I was doing and quickly pulled my hand away. Then, he leaned in close, staring into my eyes intently. Just as I considered punching him in the face, he chuckled and lay back down. No lies this time. Seems like you really don't like him anymore. I had stopped liking him a long time ago. Those 10 years of feelings dissolved into a fleeting habit the moment I was reborn, and that insignificant heartbeat vanished completely after nightmare upon nightmare. Now, all I wanted was to stay far away from him. As far as possible. Hopefully, once I got into college, we'd never cross paths again. You're thinking about going to Boston? Matthew asked, surprised by my answer, as we walked side by side. Why? Because I liked it. My last life. I'd chosen New York to follow Brandon, not applying to a single school in Boston, because I like it. I looked down at our shadows under the streetlight. Matthew was tall, yet the streetlight condensed his shadow into a small, compact form. Kind of funny. Yeah, Boston's nice. He kicked a pebble by his feet, and there was a hint of happiness in his voice that I couldn't quite place. When we reached the entrance to my neighborhood, I said goodbye and asked, so, you really live just up ahead? He seemed surprised for a moment. Then he put on his usual laid-back smile. Yep. Wanna come over? No, thanks. clutching my bag. I quickly walked into my complex. Later, I thought back on it. The reason I hadn't noticed him around in my past life was probably because I was always too focused on trailing Brandon that I hadn't noticed anyone else, let alone someone like Matthew, whom Brandon couldn't stand. After spending a while going to and from school with Matthew, the semester soon came to an end. With the start of senior year came the inevitable seat changes. Brandon and Matthew switched seats, the teacher said casually from the podium. I froze, my workbook still in my hand. Matthew raised his hand immediately. I'm not switching. He was notorious for his relaxed attitude and frequent absences, so the teachers didn't particularly favor him. The teacher frowned, displeased. And why not? I like sitting by the window, Matthew replied, opening the window as he spoke. The sunlight outside was just right. IT fell over him, making him seem even more striking. Across the room, Brandon looked over at me. As if Matthew's seat was something he was determined to claim, I raised my hand as well. Teacher, Brandon is a top student, and a lot of classmates ask him for help. I'm afraid it'll disrupt others and affect both of our studies. In other words, Brandon sitting alone was the best option. The teacher thought about it and agreed with my reasoning. In the end, he swapped Matthew's seat with the girl behind him. Matthew seemed pleased with the outcome. He balanced his desk on his head and gave me a wink. As long as you're not sitting with Brandon. I don't mind sitting next to anyone. The pressure of graduation was mounting. Even though it was my second time going through it, there were still moments I felt suffocated. Matthew's training also became more intense. And he showed up in class less and less often, but conversations about him grew more frequent. Girls who'd once dismissed Matthew started to change their tune as he racked up win after win in competitions. Other than his poor grades and temper, he doesn't really have any flaws, my new desk mate Karen concluded as we gossiped about him. I didn't stop working on my problems, but I still added. He actually has a pretty good temper. Karen hadn't expected me to respond and leaned closer, curious. I also heard you like Hymus, that true? That rumor had been around forever. I paused, then looked at her with a bit of exasperation. No, it's not true. How could I like him? Don't believe everything people say. And sooner had I finished speaking than a bottle of water appeared on my desk. I turned and saw Matthew. A light sheen of sweat on his forehead. Awkward. After a few seconds of eye contact, I looked down at the water bottle. How much was it? I'll pay you back. Matthew seemed annoyed. He didn't take the money, nor did he say anything. After he'd napped through a whole class, Brandon came over. He placed a form on my desk and said gently, "The teacher asked you to participate in this competition. It could help you get a recommended admission spot." It would be a lie to say I wasn't excited to hear recommended admission. I took the form without asking anything, but I didn't expect that I'd be paired with Brandon for the competition. If you'd known I'd be here, you wouldn't have come? He asked as he sat next to me during the training session. That I looked up at him calmly. Why now? I could look at him without feeling anything, but of course not. I replied politely, moving my chair slightly away. Getting a recommendation is important. Much more important than you. I wasn't sure if it was my actions or my words that seemed to make his smile freeze for a moment. I ignored him and began preparing for the class. When I finished the problem set and looked up, I saw Matthew standing outside the classroom. He was a whole new person now, surrounded by girls who eagerly try to strike up a conversation. You like someone like that? Brandon, noticing my gaze, looked toward Matthew outside as well. His tone casual. I turned back to him and replied firmly, "I just don't like people like you. What are you doing here?" I asked Matthew as he walked beside me. "Don't tell me you're just passing by again." He lifted a hand to pat my head. "There's a sports center next door, didn't you know?" I instinctively glanced back. Sure enough, there was a sports center. You train at this hour every day? I had just come from my evening prep class, so it was already late. Did you think winning championships was that easy? He gave me a mischievous wink, and somehow his laid-back tone made it all seem effortless. Smiling, I nodded. All right. Would I have the honor of treating our champion to a meal? An apology for my offense earlier. Dinner? He raised an eyebrow. I nodded toward a small restaurant by the street. Matthew looked over and his eyes softened. Well then, I'll grant you the privilege. But before our food arrived, a woman showed up. She wore an elegant red dress and high heels. her makeup flawlessly applied as she stood in front of Matthew. "Matthew?" Her voice was soft and delicate. Matthew looked up, and the smile on his face vanished instantly. The woman looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. I glanced down at the plate in front of me that should have been Matthew's and sighed. It seems I'm too sinful. I can't even manage to treat someone to a meal. After Matthew left with that woman, I didn't see him for days. The next time I saw him was outside the entrance to my neighborhood. He stood there alone, a stark contrast to his usual vibrant self. "Matthew?" I called out. He looked up at me, and a spark returned to his otherwise distant eyes. "I was starting to think you'd been kidnapped. You've been gone so long," I joked, trying to lighten the gloomy air around him. It seemed to work. He curved his lips into a faint smile and gave my head a light smack. "Can't you think a little better of me?" "Matthew is injured." I pointed at the small patch of gauze visible on his leg. "What happened here?" He glanced down at his leg, then tugged at his pants. "It must have hurt because he sucked in a sharp breath, but he still played it off." "It's nothing. It's only been a few days. Showed you end up like this?" I pulled up his pant leg, frowning at the bandages wrapped around his leg. He grabbed my hand, chuckling softly. Confused, I looked up, only to realize he'd leaned in close. Really close. Close enough that his breath made my face feel like it was on fire. Worried about me. His mischievous eyebrows lifted, a smirk playing on his lips. "You haven't fallen for me, have you?" I jumped back in shock. I pulled my hand free and stood up quickly. "What nonsense are you talking about, Rachel?" He looked up at me, his eyes no longer distant or detached like when he'd waited outside my neighborhood. They were bright, as if holding all the stars in the sky. "I told you. Eyes don't lie." I couldn't deal with this. I turned my back to him instinctively. "Matthew, if you keep talking like that, I'll rip that mouth of yours off." I spat out the words and fled, not daring to look back. Matthew had always had a loose tongue. He was used to saying whatever he wanted without a second thought. I should have been used to it by now. Not reacting so dramatically today, I rolled over in bed, deciding not to think about it anymore. Yes, I ended up lying awake. It was all Matthew's fault. This ridiculous, loose-lipped dog, babbling nonsense all day. The next morning, I glared wearily at Matthew, waiting by the neighborhood entrance with dark circles under my eyes. He seemed especially cheerful and waved at me. "Good morning. Good morning." My foot. I ignored him and walked on. Since his leg injury prevented him from training, he started attending classes regularly. Now, the girls in the class had split into two camps. One team around Brandon, the other around Matthew. Just as I raised my hand to rub my temples, I heard Matthew's exasperated voice. "I'm trying to sleep. Stop making noise." But his way of handling things was far better than Brandon's. I pressed my lips together, a bit pleased. The results of the competition came quickly. As always, Brandon came in first, and I placed second. The teacher was thrilled and said he wanted to treat the two of us to a meal. I initially wanted to decline, but after glancing at the trophy in my hand, I agreed. "Rachel." As soon as I walked into the restaurant, Brandon waved me over. I sighed, walking slowly toward him. "Hasn't the teacher arrived yet?" I asked. Taking the seat across from Brandon, he poured me a glass of water with a thoughtful smile. "He might be delayed." I nodded. "With the recommended admission secured, we'll be able to go to the same school together," he said, glancing up at me as he rinsed his chopsticks. I froze. Did I end my previous life? This would have made me ecstatic. I would have dreamed of it with a smile. But in the end, I'd only gotten into a school that was somewhat close to his stud. There only one option for the recommendation? I smiled at him. "I want to try all my options." The words seemed to hit him hard. His face stiffened. I pretended not to notice his discomfort, glancing at my watch. "It's been a while. If the teacher doesn't show up soon, I'll get going with that." I slung my bag over my shoulder and stood to leave. I hadn't made it far from the restaurant before Brandon grabbed my arm. "I don't understand," he said, his frustration evident. "What exactly do you dislike about me?" I turned back to look at him. Under the street lamp, he no longer seemed so aloof. His grip on me was almost a mirror of the countless times I'd held onto him. "Brandon." I pulled my arm free and asked him, "Don't tell me you're actually interested in me." Like I said, Brandon has issues. Did I end my last life? I chased after him, practically throwing myself at his feet. wishing I could pluck stars from the sky for him. He wouldn't even look at me twice. Now that I don't even bother to glance his way, he's suddenly interested in me. Definitely messed up. Next to me, on the sidelines of gym class, Matthew sat with the other injured students that I turned to look at him, and he pointed at Brandon, who was running on the field. Look at him, running so sluggishly. Bet he's got kidney issues. Puffed. I spit out the water I'd just sipped. Why do you hate him so much? I twisted the cap back onto my bottle. Eyeing Matthew, it seemed like he'd harbored hostility toward Brandon from the start. And my last life. I didn't recall them ever crossing paths. Matthew glanced at me, then stood, brushing the dust off his hands before walking away in another direction. Because he deserves it. That answered nothing. Gym class hadn't ended when Karen rushed over and sat beside me. You heard? Something big just happened. She immediately launched into gossip. Since she'd started sitting next to me, I was always up to date on the class gossip. What big news? Edward's mom went to the principal's office. I frowned. Who's Edward? The name rang a vague bell. You don't remember. That senior from 2 grades above us. Super rich. Gets driven in a fancy car every day. It started to come back. I vaguely recalled seeing him from afar during my freshman year. But hasn't he been graduated for over a year? What's his mom doing here? Karen checked around us. Then leaned close. I overheard them talking by the principal's office. Matthew is Edward's father's illegitimate son. Edward's mom came to school to demand that the principal expel Matthew. What? I stared at Karen in shock. Are you sure you heard right? Positive. My mind flashed back to the glamorous woman who'd come for Matthew that night. Then I remembered his swimming talent, yet I'd never heard about him winning any championships after that. What really happened to Matthew in my last life? The news of Matthew being an illegitimate child spread quickly. As soon as I heard classmates gossiping, I glanced at Karen. She shook her head. I only told you that. I looked over at Matthew's seat. Feeling worried, it was empty. He must have heard the cruel rumors going around. Rachel, could you grab something for me? Just as I was about to look for Matthew, the chemistry teacher called me over from the doorway. The chemistry lab was in another building, and by the time I got there, the bells signaling the start of class had rung. I decided to wait until the end of class to go find Matthew and started looking for the lab equipment the teacher needed. Then suddenly, there was a loud pop from behind me. I turned to see a small flame flicker to life not far away. After experiencing that fire, I'd never been able to face flames again. I even stayed far from the gas stove at home, watching the fire grow larger and larger. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor. Somebody help! Help me! I was trembling, crying as I called for help. The flames spread, and just when I thought I was doomed to die in a fire once again, someone burst into the room. Rachel, it was Matthew. Please help me. I was gasping, sobbing uncontrollably. Matthew rushed over, wrapping his soaked jacket around me and pressing a hand firmly over my eyes. The raging fire disappeared, replaced by utter darkness. It's okay. We're okay. Matthew's voice was low and hoarse, as if he was just as scared. I'm here. I'll get you out of here. It felt like clinging to a lifeline in the darkness. I held onto him tightly. A crowd seemed to gather, and the noise around us grew louder. With his arm around me, Matthew led me out. I didn't know how long we'd been walking when I heard Brandon's breathless voice. Rachel, are you all right? The sound of his voice was enough to make me feel as if I were still trapped in that inferno. A wave of dizziness hit me. Before I blacked out, I heard Matthew's cold voice. Stay away from her. They say being burned alive is the most painful way to die. I crouched in the corner of the balcony, watching the flames licking closer, my heart gripped by endless terror. Help me, please. Someone help me. I had no idea how many times I shouted until suddenly, someone broke through the fire and came toward me. It was 17-year-old Matthew. He wrapped me tightly in his soaking wet jacket. Don't be afraid, Rachel. Holding me close, he whispered softly, I'm here. I've got you. The raging flames seemed to slowly retreat. I shivered, chilled by the wet jacket around me. Doctor. Charles, is she all right? In a daze. I heard Matthew's voice, she'll be fine. Just a bit shaken up, she'll be okay when she wakes. The doctor's voice sounded a bit distant. You should worry about yourself. The principal's under a lot of pressure right now. After the doctor left, I finally opened my eyes. Matthew stood by my bedside, his clothes bearing scorch marks, his face smudged with soot. "You're awake?" Seeing my eyes open, he let out a breath, the frown on his face easing, and I nodded. Glancing toward the door before asking, "Is the principal going to expel you?" He froze for a moment, his gaze dropping slightly as, "Oh, you heard?" A trace of self-mockery crept into his voice. "That woman from the other day, is she your mother?" He nodded, just as I'd suspected, but something about that woman had seemed oddly familiar, as if I'd seen her somewhere before. "Rachel." He suddenly looked up at me. "Yes, I'm an illegitimate child." I was taken aback. I hadn't expected him to be so blunt. "So what?" I looked back at him. "It's not your fault. Whether it's your mother's or your father's mistake, it has nothing to do with you. Leave adult matters to adults. Just focus on growing up and becoming someone who won't make the same mistakes." Maybe it was the bright light in the infirmary, but his eyes seemed to shine. He raised his hand and tousled my hair. "All right, the fire in the lab," combined with the news about Matthew's background, quickly became the hottest gossip at school. Adding fuel to the fire was the arrival of Matthew's alluring mother at the school, and no one knew what she said to the principal, but he reluctantly escorted her to his office, then saw her out with a forced smile. After leaving the principal's office, she didn't leave the school. Instead, she stood outside our classroom, watching for a long time. That I glanced at the empty seat behind me and sighed. It didn't seem likely she'd see Matthew today. What I hadn't expected was that she'd stop me on my way home after school. "Rachel." She smiled, waving at me. I hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hello, ma'am." She gave me a gentle smile, her eyebrows arching in a way that reminded me of Matthew. "You've grown so much. I didn't expect her to start like this. You were just this tall back then." She gestured in the air. "Only about 6 years old, and now look at you." She talked on, reminiscing, and I struggled to recall my life at 6 years old. It was a distant memory, but a fragment surfaced in my mind. "Mrs. Whitney?" I asked tentatively. She smiled and patted my head, confirming my guess. "When I was 6, a mother and her son moved in next door. Though they only stayed for less than 6 months, they'd faded from my memory long ago. I never would have guessed that the mother and son were Matthew and his mother. Tell Matthew he doesn't need to worry about school. I've already sorted it out." This, I realized, was likely the true purpose of her visit. I nodded. "Why don't you tell him yourself, Auntie?" She paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face. "Did Matthew not tell you?" She touched her stomach. "I got married. It's been years since Matthew wanted anything to do with me. An illegitimate child. A mother who remarried and became pregnant. How had Matthew managed to remain so vibrant, to appear like he was thriving despite everything? I found Matthew in the small park not far from my house, where he'd been missing for days. He was crouched under a bridge, a half-smoked cigarette between his fingers. The dim streetlight cast a melancholy glow over him, making him look heartbreakingly vulnerable. Maybe this was the real him. He looked up, startled, and instinctively tossed the cigarette aside. I glanced at the smoldering cigarette on the ground, then walked over and gave him a light slap on the head. "You were smoking." He shook his head. Then he spit out the bubblegum he'd been chewing and showed it to me. "What are you doing here?" He scooted over to make room for me. I crouched down beside him. "What? Is this place reserved just for you?" He laughed. When he laughed, he really was breathtaking, like a shooting star across the night sky. "Matthew, why aren't you coming to school?" He picked up a rock and tossed it into the river. "It's not like there are many days left to go, anyway. Your mother came to school today." His hand, poised to throw another rock, froze midair. She spoke with the principal. "You won't be expelled. This time." The rock made a huge splash as it hit the water. Matthew stood up. "I don't need her phony concern. She got married. She's having another child." He looked down at me, his gaze bleak and empty. "She's shed that shameful status, and this new child will be born legitimate, loved, and celebrated by everyone. Rachel, what about me?" His voice was so low and raspy, like a needle pricking into my heart. I stood up, meeting his eyes. "You have me. With me, You are just as legitimate, and you deserve every bit of love and blessing. Matthew, come back to school. Stay with me. I end my previous life. It was around this time that Matthew left school, and then there was no news of him after that. But this time, Matthew returned, and no one in school dared to gossip about his background anymore, as everyone was focused on the pressure of final exams. The months slipped by in the blink of an eye on graduation day. The once tense students were now like wild horses let loose. Celebrating all over campus, I stood quietly in the hallway, feeling an unprecedented sense of calm. Just then, Brandon walked over. Although he'd already secured a recommendation for admission, he'd still taken the college entrance exams. Rachel. He stood beside me, looking up at the sky with me. Where do you want to go to college? That was a question I had once asked him. I turned to look at him. Ever since I stopped liking him, I realized he wasn't anything special after all. Love really does put a ridiculous filter on people. I'll go to a city I love for college, I replied with a smile. But it definitely won't be New York. He was stunned. Rachel. He looked down at me. I gave up my recommended admission. That genuinely surprised me. I end this life. He seemed like a completely different person. If you want to go to Boston, I'd go with you. He said seriously. I like you. Be my girlfriend. I frowned, feeling slightly sick. It was ironic how the tables had turned, but it didn't bring me any satisfaction. Just then, I saw Matthew waving at me from downstairs. I felt my frown soften as I waved back with a smile. As I turned to head down the stairs, I said to Brandon, with your grades, even if you give up the recommendation, you can still go to New York. Brandon. I don't like you. I looked him straight in the eye, speaking each word with conviction. I never liked you before, I don't like you now, and I never will. I will never like you, and I'll never again like the version of myself that lost her identity for your sake. What's so great about Matthew? He demanded, trailing behind me with a stubborn expression. He smokes, drinks, fights, and has terrible grades. He's nothing but an illegitimate child. As soon as he said that, I turned and slapped him across the face. I used to think his infidelity was a fault of his future self, that I shouldn't hold it against him now, so I'd only ever tried to keep my distance, but I never expected he'd be like this. Maybe I'd never really known him at all. He's better than you in every way. I laughed bitterly. Brandon. What do you even like about me? As far as I remember, I've never once pursued you since you transferred here. Look behind you. I gestured to the group of girls clustered nearby. There are so many girls who admire you, but you ignore them and fixate on me instead. Are you a masochist? Or is it that you're so used to being put on a pedestal that you only feel the need to conquer someone like me, who's indifferent to you? I looked at him coldly. If I acted like the girls behind you, would you still like me? Of course not. He probably never expected anyone to say something like that to him. He stood there, frozen. A girl from the group behind him looked like she was about to step forward, but before she could say anything, Matthew took my hand from behind and pulled me downstairs. That day, Matthew and I ran for a long time. The wind whipped past us, blowing my hair back. Matthew laughed and said, "See? Even the wind says you're freed." I was free. Brandon didn't show up at the graduation party. The girls who liked him looked at me as if they wanted to swallow me whole, but with Matthew sitting beside me, none of them dared approach. Eating fruit from the karaoke platter, I smiled at Matthew. You're like my bodyguard now, with pleasure. He raised his brows, flashing that familiar, mischievous grin. Everyone drank that day. For many classmates, it was their first time drinking, and they ended up completely wasted. After I'd taken the last drunken girl who'd cursed me home, I turned to find Matthew standing behind me. His ears were tinged pink. He did quite a bit to drink. We walked home side by side, and the streetlights stretched our shadows long. Even though there was a small gap between us, our shadows seemed to be holding hands. Rachel. Matthew suddenly stopped. I looked at our shadows and paused. Did I like you? He turned to face me. His eyes were as bright as ever, like they were pulling me in, and I lowered my gaze a little, tucking my hair behind my ear. I know that I'd known for a long time. When he took me to watch his competitions, one after another. When he jumped down from the wall to stand between me and that gang of troublemakers, my background isn't honorable. I'm not good at studying and I get into fights. He repeated everything Brandon had once said, but I don't smoke. I raised my hand and covered his mouth. His lips were cool, moving slightly against my palmed. It tickle. My palm tickled. My heart tickled, too. Your background isn't your fault, I answered him patiently. 1 point at a time. Not everyone has to excel in academics. You're an amazing swimmer, winning every competition. And even though you fight, you never pick fights needlessly and always protect me, dear wonderful. I blinked and tilted my head, looking at him. I like you. He froze, his eyes lighting up, like the stars had scattered across them. Really, really. After that, we didn't say much till we walked back to the neighborhood entrance. Both blushing, just as I was about to say goodbye, Matthew suddenly asked, "Do you want to try some bubble gum?" I blinked. Surprise, it's really sweet, he promised, grinning. I nodded blankly, holding out my hand. Instead, he popped a piece of gum into his own mouth and blew a bubble. Before I could figure out what he was up to, he leaned down, and the bubble brushed against my lips. My mind went completely blank as I instinctively licked my lips. With a soft pop, the bubble burst, and I finally snapped out of it. Sweet? Matthew asked with a teasing smile. Did I end that moment? All the blood rushed to my face, my cheeks burning. I stomped my foot and turned to run away. Not sweet at all, I lied. Both Matthew and I ended up in Boston, thanks to his exceptional swimming achievements. He was given special admission to our school. I in Boston. All those old rumors and gossip faded away. Well, if it isn't Matthew, I teased, watching him enter the cafe after his training, looking smug. Matthew grinned and slid into the seat next to me. Who's Matthew? I'm Rachel's boyfriend. I laughed and gave his chest a playful punch, sneaking a quick squeeze. He was definitely getting more solid. Moments like this often felt like a dream. Though it was my second time in college, it felt like this was how it was always meant to be. Endless competitions, countless awards, and a boyfriend who treated me with genuine care, and more waiting around outside the boys' dorm. Time passed, warm and beautiful. I in the blink of an eye. 10 years had gone by. It was September 8th again. The year I turned 27, I stared at the calendar on the wall, lost in thought. 10 years already. Matthew hugged me from behind, looking at the calendar with me. Yeah, 10 years ago today, I became your desk mate. Yes, smiling, I turned and hugged him back. Come on, get ready to go, or we'll be late. Today was his last competition before retiring. It was an important one. Originally, he hadn't wanted to participate, preferring to stay home with me. But I insisted he go, not wanting him to have any regrets about it. After watching him leave, I curled up on the sofa. Some time passed, and suddenly, my high school group chat buzzed with messages. Someone announced that Brandon was getting married. Then a picture was shared. It was a photo of Brandon with a woman. Unlike the photo I'd seen 10 years ago, this woman looked proper and elegant, with features that bore a slight resemblance to mine. Karen messaged me privately. Brandon's really hung up on you, isn't he? Oh, please. I'm not carrying that burden, I replied with a smile. The group chat was lively with conversation, but all I could see on the screen was that photo of Brandon and the woman. Everything had changed, and yet it all seemed to be slowly overlapping. In hazy days, I drifted into sleep. The nightmares I hadn't had in a long time came rushing back. Once again, I was helplessly crouching on the balcony, but this time, I opened Matthew's chat window. Just as I was about to type, I paused. Instead, I exited the chat and called him. Matthew, who was in the middle of his competition, answered, his voice on the other end gentle and reassuring. Don't be afraid. I'm here. All the fear disappeared instantly. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. I heard Matthew's voice. Fine. Just say I lack sportsmanship if you want. I am retiring anyway. I struggled to fully wake up. I opened my eyes to see him standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. An overwhelming sense of safety washed over me. My nose tingled, and tears began to fall. What are you doing back? I asked, my voice hoarse. He ended the call, and it turned to look at me. With the light behind him, I couldn't see his expression clearly. All I knew was that he was as warm as the sunlight. He smiled and asked me, You fell asleep with soup on the stove. What would you do without me? When I saw the news about the fire, I had just finished a meeting. Matthew, you have another meeting this afternoon? My assistant chased after me as I loosened my tie and ran out. Cancel it. Cancel everything. I drove, running who knows how many red lights, until I finally reached the scene. The building was surrounded by a crowd, but Brandon was nowhere to be seen. His house was on fire, and he hadn't come back. There, on that balcony, someone shouted, pointing up. That's the lady of the house, Rachel, ignoring the police. I dashed inside. The fire had cut off the elevator, so I had to climb the stairs, floor by floor, feeling my heart grow colder with each step. The fire was truly massive, and in the end, I collapsed just outside the door. If I had another chance, I would never, ever stand aside and let her be with someone else. Perhaps heaven took pity on me. When I opened my eyes again, I was back 10 years in the past. Then let's switch seats. Matthew, go sit next to Rachel, the teacher said, and I couldn't contain my happiness. I started purposefully getting closer to Rachel. The rumor that she liked me, I spread it myself. Even if she was initially trying to use me to make Brandon jealous, I didn't care as long as she stayed by my side, as long as I could protect her. That was enough that I no longer followed her from a distance. Every morning, I woke up early and took a long detour to her neighborhood, so we could walk to school together, and then walk home together afterward. Every time Brandon tried to approach her, I was there and I made sure to accidentally pass by wherever she happened to be. It didn't matter if she said she didn't like me. Sooner or later, she would. Everything was going well, until the day my mother, whom I hadn't seen in years, showed up. It all brought back that unbearable past, and I was reminded of my shameful status. And no matter how much I changed, some things were inevitable. That guy named Edward still found me, and the thugs he hired were not people I could handle. You're nothing but a bastard, he said, looking down at me. Tell your mother to stay away from my family. You'll never be part of us. I couldn't argue with a single word he said. This identity was like a weight that made it hard to breathe, and Rachel was even more dazzling than in the past. So dazzling that I often questioned if I was worthy of her. You think you deserve her? After the college entrance exams, Brandon found me and repeated the same words from my past life. He knew I liked Rachel. He'd known for a long time. This time I shot back. Do you think you deserve her? Did he deserve the kind of burning love she'd shown him in our last life? Before leaving, I looked back at him, noticing how tightly he clutched his coffee cup. You had a chance to have her, I said coolly. But you didn't cherish it. If you don't cherish her, then don't blame me for taking her from you. Because of Rachel, I chose a different path this time. I didn't give up on myself, but instead worked my way up to the national team. Soon, my retirement day arrived. The entertainment industry was already welcoming me with open arms, and once I retired, I'd be signed to a talent agency. I was willing to do anything if it meant giving Rachel a good life. But she insisted that I compete on September 18th. I love seeing you on the field, she said. I never refused her requests. Then come watch me compete. Stop it. I've got work to do, she teased. Leaving her alone at home made me uneasy. Before the match, I called her twice, but she didn't answer. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, and ignoring all objections, I changed and rushed home. When I opened the door, I saw her curled up on the sofa, sound asleep. In the kitchen, a pot of soup was simmering, filling the room with its gentle bubbling. I walked into the kitchen and turned off the stove. As the bubbling subsided, so did the tension in my heart. I crouched by the sofa, watching Rachel's peaceful face, feeling a gratitude I'd never known before, until her phone rang. Waking her, should have put it on silent. It's fine. A bit of scandal is good these days. I've already got media attention before even entering the industry, I joked, pulling her into my arms and kissing her furrowed brow. See? I rushed back to drink your soup. She was easy to cheer up, a bit of coaxing, and she was smiling again. Our high school group chat was still buzzing with conversation. Someone posted a blurry photo. Rachel enlarged it over and over, pointing at a figure standing behind her in the picture. Hey, is that you? It looked like a high school event from freshman year. Yeah, I said, holding her tighter. That I was always behind you, but since you never looked back, I had to run up to your side. She looked puzzled. then tilted her head and asked, "Tell me honestly, when did you start liking me?" A very long time ago that I can't even remember. Maybe it was when we were 6 and she held my hand, saying, "Grown-ups fighting is their problem. We're kids. And kids should just focus on growing up and doing their best to become good people." Maybe that was when she planted a seed in my heart, a seed that slowly sprouted, then grew, and eventually bloomed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.